Hello and welcome to today's Fireside chat on Microsoft BYOL pathways, or Bring Your Own License Pathways. My name is Carl O'Doherty. I'm a principal Microsoft licensing consultant. I'm also joined on the call by another fellow principal licensing consultant, Neve Nusilovon. Neve, how are you today?
I'm very well, Carl. Thanks for asking. How are you?
Good, good, good. So thanks for joining us on this brief fireside chat on all things BYOL. Um, the area BYOL is an interesting one, right? Because I think when we talk to a lot of customers, there's a lot of confusion around this one, and I think we see some customers who are really sophisticated in terms of understanding the product terms, understanding that Microsoft has a tendency to change the product terms, having a good grasp of what they've got deployed, where, how it's being used relative to the product terms, and having that level of ongoing governance that you need to have in place, particularly when you're leveraging BYOL to make sure you're not falling afoul of the licensing terms. Because I think, I often use the phrase when we talk that, cloud doesn't equal license compliance. And I think BYOL is one particular area where a lot of organizations, if they don't take stock of what are the options available to them before they
Yeah,
start to move into public cloud or other third-party host environment, relative to the licenses that they own, that can create some significant challenges down the line. Particularly if they're faced with the risk of an audit, or you might find that they've chosen to bring a particular type of license to a particular type of service provider's environment, but actually the Microsoft licensing terms don't permit it in any shape or form. So then you've got to get into the whole realms of, well, do we have to re-architect, or do we have to
yeah.
use an alternative solution here? So
Budgets. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, so it gets messy, right? So I think we'll talk about BYOL pathways in this session today, but I think probably one of the most important things to get the head around is the types of service providers. And I know you spend a bit of time looking at this stuff quite closely in terms of the intricacies of, you know, particularly when you're working with customers who have, you know, various different clouds or a multi-cloud strategy, as well as using, more traditional third-party hosters,
yeah.
and the implications of that. So I guess if you were to look at this across the board, what are those service providers? What do they look like? Maybe you can give today's viewers an insight of what are the things to consider on that front.
Sure. Yeah, look, I guess what it boils down to is that you really need to understand, you know, number one, I suppose, kind of what type of a cloud environment that you're looking at, so is it, a multi-tenant environment or a public cloud environment, as it's also known, and then kind of what licenses that you would like to kind of bring to that environment. So we'd be typically talking about, let's say, what in Microsoft terms, the qualified multi-tenant host, or QMTH. Um, then you've also got like other kind of providers such as like authorized outsourcers, and that's where you can um, bring kind of licenses, and work them in the same way as you would kind of on premise. And that could be both, like that could be kind of a traditional, physical kind of a hardware kind of environment, that we would have been used to in the past, or also like kind of a private cloud kind of environment. And again, it boils down to kind of, what licenses is it that you want to, or do you want to bring. And then, of course, we have the category of the big four kind of listed providers with the big kind of question mark, and that's since October 2019, and that refers to Alibaba, Amazon, AWS, and Google, including Microsoft in that too. But unlike the other three, Microsoft gives more kind of positive terms and conditions to the licenses that you can or cannot provide, or that you could provide, but only up to a certain date or a certain kind of version of software. So really, like, yeah, from a considerations point of view, what is the environment, that you want to bring your licenses to? Who is the service provider that you are thinking of? And number three, kind of what licenses specifically is it on the client side, or server side, application server, Windows server. So those kind of three kind of key considerations would be really important for what you can and cannot do and how it affects you from a BYOL perspective.
I think that's really useful information, because I think everybody just kind of puts all service providers into the same pot, right? A lot of people who are probably watching this video today haven't fully understood the concept of a qualified multi-tenanted hoster, or a QMTH, and what that allows you to do and what licenses they allow you to bring, versus the listed providers, as you mentioned, AWS, Google, and Alibaba, for example. And then that third category, as you mentioned, the authorized outsourcer, which is kind of like everybody in between, really, right? So, and again, there's some pretty strict conditions that would apply to bringing licenses to those environments, particularly their environments. So particularly around, I think, isn't it, hardware must be dedicated to the customer's own use. So, that could throw up some potential risk if you're working with an authorized outsourcer that perhaps has set up their environment to provide shared tenancy type services, and then you're bringing those licenses to the party. You might be falling afoul of Microsoft's licensing terms. So I think that this is a really important one. I feel is that first stop is looking at the service provider that you're going to use, and then once you figure out what's that service provider, then you're looking at, well, what are the applications that I'm looking to bring, what licenses do I hold for those applications, and then you've got that fun task of looking at the Microsoft product terms to figure out, can I actually bring those licenses with or without software assurance to that particular party. And I guess that's where someone like you or me can come in to give that insight, or to take the pain away of having to interpret Microsoft's product licensing terms. But I think a really interesting one on this one in particular is with Microsoft 365, or Apps for Enterprise, or what was formerly Office
The artist formerly known as Office 365 Pro Plus. Yeah.
If looking at, say, some of the listed providers, services, like if you look at like desktop as a service from AWS, and you're looking to load your Apps for Enterprise licenses onto those hosted desktops, that actually can create some license compliance risk because of the way Microsoft's licensing terms are structured, and that actually result in the need to re-architect how you license that product completely, and separate out how you're licensing that, which would be traditionally through a Microsoft 365 E3 or E5 SKU, or whatever SKU it is that you're choosing on the day. So there's quite a lot to consider here, and those listed providers, QMTH, authorized outsourcers, understanding how they're going to work with your organization is therefore key. The other thing I guess we should be talking about is the pathways, right? So and that's the core theme of this fireside chat, but I think the previous comments that you made are probably the most important in terms of understanding the types of service provider. But in effect, and jump in if I'm forgetting anything on this one, Neve, but there's a couple of core elements at play here. So first of all, when you talk about Microsoft BYOL pathways, a general precondition is that you have a base license, so you have an underlying license, or a valid underlying license, upon which you've purchased software assurance. So software assurance is with Microsoft call their support and maintenance program that gives you upgrades to the latest versions of the products. But over the last, say, 10 or so years, we've seen Microsoft include a variety of enhanced product use rights to allow you to use their software in more complicated scenarios.
You nearly can't afford not to have software assurance, just in case, really.
So what does that do? It opens up the keys, gives you the keys to the castle in terms of giving you access to license mobility, which is a core software assurance benefit that allows you to bring those licenses that you're currently using on premise, and to use those licenses in shared tenancy type scenarios, without falling outside of Microsoft's licensing terms. The other core, and how that license mobility piece applies, if I remember these all off the top of my head, they don't apply. License mobility is important to call out that it doesn't apply to all Microsoft products. And I know we have a fireside chat in the making on license mobility itself, but just at a very high level, it covers Exchange, SharePoint Server, BizTalk, Dynamics, I think Azure DevOps Server, System Center,
Yep.
SharePoint. I've left out Skype because I think we're pretty much done with Skype for business at this stage, right? So it's
Yeah.
important to realize that, license mobility isn't available across all Microsoft products. You'll notice that Windows Server isn't called out in there, which is obviously a big one. So, but that is one of the key pathways to being able to bring some of those traditional application servers that you'll be using on premise to listed providers or other hosted provider scenarios. The other key licensing pathway, I would say, is Azure Hybrid Benefit, right? So that takes two forms. You've got Azure Hybrid Benefit for Windows Server and Azure Hybrid Benefit for SQL Server databases. Again, it's a software assurance benefit. You need to maintain active software assurance to leverage this benefit, but it does provide some pretty good competitive advantage for Microsoft by allowing you to reuse surplus on-premise licenses that you might have where dual use rights don't apply, or allows you to bring licenses that do have dual use rights. So I think that a really good example of that is Windows Server Data Center. To bring that entitlement to Azure, and by doing so, it gives you an opportunity to remove the software rental costs associated with Windows Server and SQL Server database. And that, if that's done and it's applied in an optimum way, it actually can have some pretty good cost savings that can be achieved just through the flick of a switch. And the other ones to call out in terms of a pathway, again, would be looking at the product terms, right? So the product use rights for various different products may include loopholes that you can exploit without falling outside of the licensing terms. And I would say, probably fair to say that those loopholes are far
Very few. Very
but
few.
it's
I mean, yeah,
definitely worth it.
it's I guess where if we're talking about licenses without software assurance, and we talk about like authorized outsources, and where you have hardware absolutely dedicated to your own environment that you can treat it pretty much as on premise, and this that wouldn't necessarily require software assurance, and that would be really really useful to know as well.
So as you said, you can't live without software assurance. I think there's a perception years back that I don't need software assurance because I don't upgrade for 5 or 6 years. That's the point. But you got to read the small print, and it's the enhanced product use rights that it delivers is what's key. And I genuinely think that if moving to the cloud in the future, or if running long-term workloads in the cloud, software assurance can provide some significant benefit that organizations should look at buying it if they haven't bought it. If they bought it, great. But then if they have bought it, as we always say, you want to make sure that you're not buying too much. Right? I think that about wraps things up for today's fireside chat. We covered quite a bit in a very small amount of time. We will do some other sessions on license mobility and software assurance. You can check out on our YouTube video channel. And if you've got any questions off the back of today's session, you're looking to try and get your head around BYOL, do feel free to reach out to us. Always happy to answer any licensing questions you may have, or if you see a need to have more of a deeper dive with the consulting team here at version 1 within the SAM practice, do feel free to give us a shout. Look forward to seeing you soon. Take care.
Thanks, Carl.